people will continue to join us as they do. So welcome to everybody. If this is your first time joining us for the World Federation of Colleges and Polytechnics SDG Affinity Group. We are very delighted to have you here, and in a moment I will ask my co-leads to introduce themselves, but I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Judy Vargatoth, and I work at Colleges and Institutes Canada in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and our organization is the lead for the first year of this SDG Affinity Group. And at CICAN, as we call ourselves, I am the manager of impact partnerships, and I am responsible in part for promoting and championing the Sustainable Development Goals across our sector in Canada. And I'm delighted to have a number of co-leads from around the world, and I will invite them each to introduce themselves briefly, and I will just go across my screen. So the next person would be Andre, please.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Well, my name is Andre Bojano. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Community Engagement and Innovation at INACAP. It's a huge institution in Chile. So I'm very happy to be here again with you. I can see some old faces and some new faces as well. So excellent.
Thanks, Andre. That's great. Glory.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Glory Mutungi from Kenya. I'm the principal of Nairobi Technical Training Institute at TVET Institution, and also the chairperson of Kenya Association of Technical Training Institutions. Happy to see you all here. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Glory. Jane.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Well, for me, it's this evening, it's 10 p.m. I'm speaking to you from Sydney, Australia, and I work for TAFE New South Wales, which is our state government education and training provider, and we provide certificate to degree programs across a whole range of different subjects. So I'm thrilled to be part of this initiative. And I'm really pleased to see people join us for what's going to be a really fascinating session today. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Jane. And Ken.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Ken Barrientos from UNESCO Univoc. We are a collaborator of the SDG group. I'll make this quick because there's a drilling happening right above me, so welcome everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. The timing, really. So Ken is works out of Bonn, Germany, and she's a wonderful collaborator for this SDG Affinity Group. And so now I'm delighted to introduce our two guests who are joining us here, also from the United Nations, from UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, where they are they've been working, of course, on the SDGs and on how to teach, how to train around the SDGs, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their roles, and then we'll hear first from Medina and then from Elena. So thank you so much to both of you for joining us. I'm going to hand you the floor, and just before I do, I just want to encourage folks to use the chat box if you have some questions as they speak, and we will, if there are some questions, I will make sure to read them out to them, and so that they can answer them. And also, once they've done about a 20-minute presentation, we'll be breaking out into smaller groups to discuss some questions which they've shared with us. And you can see in the Jamboard, which is already in the chat box, or will be the link, where you can put your answers to those questions and any further questions you might have. And Medina and Elena will be joining us in the breakouts, and they will be moving from room to room, so you'll also have a chance to interact with them more directly. So over to you, Medina and Elena. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to joining this meeting and meeting you all. My name is Medina Maraliva. I work as Associate Program Officer at the Strategic Implementation of the 23rd Agenda Unit at UNITAR. And our unit provides support to the member states, to the countries and institutions and individuals in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs in a holistic manner. And we provide different kinds of trainings in a face-to-face format, but now more in an online mode due to the COVID situation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. But before that, perhaps we can do this polling, Andrea. It's a short polling to know what is the level of your knowledge about the SDGs, and then we can start the presentation. I hope everyone can see on their screens. So there are just 4 questions. I believe 2-3 minutes to fill in the polling will be sufficient. And Andrea, could you please let us know when you see if the participants have already filled in and provided their answers?
Perfect. We have 9 people who have 11 is going up. So so far so good. And I can broadcast the answers for you after so everyone can see.
That will be great.
Perfect. Okay, we'll give about 20 more seconds.
Okay, here we can see the results. So most of the participants, they know the SDGs well. And in terms of the main principles, yes, that's correct. That leave no one behind is one of the main principles of the SDGs. We will talk about it in more details later in the presentation, but we can see that people also have answered about the universal principle and integrated policies, national ownership. That's great. And also about the SDGs, we can see that most of the participants know about the targets and indicators. And okay, and we can see that the main role of the private sector is to provide financial resources. False. That's the answer of the majority. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Andre. Now let me go ahead and share my screen. So, as mentioned, we represent UNITA, UN Institute for Training and Research. And at UNITA, our unit provides training in the area of the SDGs. As most of the participants answered correctly, yes, there are 17 universal goals, and the SDGs were adopted in 2015 on September 25th after the UN, as the outcome of the UN summit. And the SDGs are part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development outcome document from this UN summit. And these 17 universal goals, they include 169 targets. And under each target, there are several indicators that help measure the progress that we are making towards the SDGs. And in total, there are 231 indicators at the moment. Initially, when they were adopted there were 232 indicators, unique indicators, and with duplicate, repeated indicators, there were 244. Now it's 247 in total and 231 unique indicators. And you can see that the 17 goals, they are represented as individual goals, but they are all interlinked, and the achievement of one SDG affects the achievement of the other group of SDGs. Here on this figure, you can see how different targets of the SDGs are interlinked and influencing each other. So sometimes there are synergies between the different goals, and sometimes there can be some trade-offs. So the countries and the individuals, they have to make a trade-off between achieving one goal and making some progress towards another. So this is the document, this is the image from the UNDESA working paper from 2015. And you, from your background, you must be thinking, how my life, how with my day-to-day life, how can I impact the achievement of the SDGs from my standpoint? And we would like to give an example, a short example. Let's say you're working in the construction industry, and you're planning to build create some buildings, and you're thinking what kind of materials you want to use, how the planning, where it should be built, etc. So there is one target under SDG 9, which I don't see it in my 2030 agenda. Upgrade infrastructure and retrofit industries to make them sustainable with increased resource use efficiency and greater adoption of clean and environmentally sound technologies and industrial processes, with all countries taking action in accordance with their respective capabilities. So looking at this target, you can see that countries, but when we talk about countries, we also, of course, include all of the individuals represented in the country. So all the people who live around the world are affecting on the achievement, on the progress of this target. And under this specific target, there is an indicator that shows the progress towards this target, and that the indicator is measured by CO2 emissions per unit of value added. In turn, you can see that total CO2 emissions are estimated based on the energy consumption data from the different sectors. And as a worker in the construction site, by making decisions on what kind of materials are you using, iron, steel, or the chemicals, or non-metallic minerals such as glass, cement, or what kind of, where you will be building, and what kind of transport equipment will be used, or machineries, or different kinds of materials such as textile, leather. All of these, but your choices, your decisions on what kind of materials are directly affecting on the amount of energy consumption, and the energy consumption is represented under a different target point 7.3. So it's with this target, we aim to double the improvement in energy efficiency. So by making the progress in for the target 9.4, you're already making the contribution to the target 7.3. So by making just day-to-day choices of how you're going to build, what kind of materials you're using, you're making your own contribution in achieving certain targets, certain goals, global goals. And it's important to achieve the resource efficiency and increase the number of green buildings. Here on this image, you can see by the World Green Building Council, you can see how building green buildings affect different kinds, different goals. So, for example, I'm not going to cover all of them, but just to pick a few. For example, green buildings produce fewer emissions, helping combat climate change. So there are less CO2 emissions. And also, if you look at the SDG 3, green buildings can improve people's health well-being. And green building design can spur innovation, contribute to climate resilient infrastructure. So this is more related to how green buildings are affecting different goals. So it's more related to environment most of the cases. But what about how we design and include and implement the principle, leave no one behind? So by this target, when building the different sites, one needs to also consider how it will be built. Will it be more inclusive, or and allow people with disabilities use those facilities, use those buildings the same way as other people are using? So UN has some guidelines on how to build those kind of areas to make it more inclusive and also available for the people with disabilities, but also for the other vulnerable people who are included, such as elderly and etc. So here you can see that by building inclusive buildings, you can contribute to the target 4.A. If you're working in the in constructing buildings for schools, building, for example, and upgrading inclusive and safe schools, and also you're at the same time affecting and influencing the achievement of target 11.7, providing access to safe and inclusive green and public spaces. And public spaces, if you look at the different parts of the world, some big cities, if you go to the metro station, there are only stairs available. So by default, people with disabilities will have trouble accessing those areas. So with this target, 11.7 under SDG 11, we try to make those public areas also available for the people with disabilities and for other vulnerable groups that that have difficulties accessing otherwise. And even in buildings, regular houses, you can see that there may be no elevators available, which make it also difficult for people with some disabilities to access it at the same time. And this target also affects the achievement of the target 8.5, which is related to the full employment and decent work with equal pay. And if you look at the broad definition of this target, it's by 2030 achieve full and productive employment, decent work for all women, men, including for young people and persons with disabilities, and equal pay for all for work of equal value. So we're trying to make this as inclusive as possible. So we integrate and we make sure that those people who are vulnerable are not left behind. So with this, I conclude my part, and I pass the floor to Yelena, or if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Medina, so much. I've been taking so many notes, really interesting, super helpful. I didn't see any questions at the moment, so we can go on to Elena, and people may be saving their questions for when they meet you in person in the small group. Thank you.
Elena, you are mute.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah. So let me start by introducing myself. Sorry for that. Yeah. By introducing myself, so I work as a senior specialist and the team leader for the strategic implementation of the 2030 Agenda team. Madina has already briefly mentioned what we do. I'm going to show you a few examples, but let me first maybe just share a couple of thoughts on what Madina had presented before. So basically what we tried to do through this small presentation was to demonstrate how in practice picking a specific profession, for example, a construction worker, not only the SDGs, but also some of the key principles of the SDGs could be reflected. Madina has talked, for example, a little bit about creating inclusive buildings and spaces, giving more specifically an example related to people with disabilities in a wheelchair in particular. And so that's one of the examples of the principle that is widely known as the principle of leave no one behind. Also, this principle has become a major advancement in our time compared to the MDGs period. In the MDGs, as some of you may know, of course, first of all, the MDG goals, the 7 goals, were to be applied by put in practice by the developing countries. And there was only one goal for developed countries, the goal on partnerships, goal A. And the way they were tracked, basically, there were a few misunderstandings, misconceptions. The progress was particularly tracked at the national level using national averages, and not sufficient attention was paid to how things are changing for different population groups. And quite often vulnerable population groups were the ones who were being left behind as things had been improving on average. So that's one of the things really that their key message of the SDGs is leave no one behind and reach the furthest first. And another principle that also was demonstrated by Madina is related to integrated approaches to policy making, implementation, to actions, to the design of projects, actions, etc. With this idea that not only we have to account for different dimensions of sustainable development, and here, of course, we talk about infrastructure, which is considered to be, in particular, buildings, etc., is considered to be more in the area of the real economy. Of course, with social aspects, when it's being built either for the provision of public services or private sector, etc., but also in particular with a strong emphasis on how to make these more environmentally friendly. But the integrated approach, it's also about taking into account the spillover effects in one SDG area on other areas. And that was mentioned by Madina. It's really important to account for the trade-offs with an idea of finding solutions that help minimize the trade-offs. Not only making a choice whether I have to do this or that, but rather come up with solutions that help to minimize these trade-offs So we could make progress on all economic, social, and environmental dimensions, but also governance, which is very important and is also reflected in Goal 16 in particular. So, and perhaps the last comment to make, and that's related to the questions that we propose. Yes, indeed, now the SDGs are universal goals. So all countries have to review all 17 goals and they have to adapt them to their national context. Meaning that some of the, for example, targets would be less relevant for some countries and others would be more relevant. And then, of course, from the policy perspective, to make it manageable, you may need to set priorities, etc. And the national realities and contexts are very different. So there is an adaptation to the national context, which is done through the processes of engagement led by governments. But what was also different with the SDGs, the process was quite participatory. So here again, the message was also for governments to engage with all the other stakeholders. SDGs are so ambitious that they cannot be implemented by governments alone. The private sector, civil society, and they do have an important role to play. And of course, as we've seen, private sector, it's not only about investing and providing solutions. Of course, how the resources are being invested is really important, and it can influence our production modes and consumption modes, etc. But what's also really important, the private sector is a big employer, and also the way we do things need to change in general. So everyone as citizens, but also through our professional life, we can contribute to the implementation of the SDGs. And from our end, just very quickly, we have been working a lot historically with policymakers. That was initially our main target audience, as you would suspect, with the UN, providing executive education to government officials. With the SDGs, really, there was a call, we need to really target, to reach out to much broader population, to other population groups, engage with private sector, civil society, youth, and really develop an offer, that learning offer that could also meet those needs. We continue working with policymakers, but we set up together with more than 50, close to 60 other UN and non-UN entities, a gateway, which we call UN SDG Learn. So it's a gateway that provides access to learning resources on SDGs developed by UN agencies who have some training and learning to offer, but also by universities, and we also have some private sector companies who are participating in that. And here are just a few examples for you to see how it looks like. There is a search engine function here. You can search by keywords, but you can also search by type of learning, for example, in which you are interested in. Courses or microlearning. Microlearning was developed, we created this category for those who are very busy, who don't necessarily want to do like a certificate program or anything like that. They just want to learn quickly. I don't know, there is one thing I want to learn per day. Then you can go and watch a 3-minute video to learn something new on SDGs. That's a little bit the idea. And the courses, it's a more structured learning where also often you have an opportunity to get a certificate, etc. You can also search by goals. And we also have 3 cross-cutting topics: Agenda 2030, breaking the silos, that's the integrated policies principle, and leave no one behind. You can also serve, you can see here that actually the search can also be more detailed, whether it's online learning, facilitated, non-facilitated, facilitated, etc. And once you've chosen or you see what is really relevant for you, you can get more detailed information and then get to the course page and take the course. What we are doing currently, actually, we are trying to develop or provide a more sophisticated recommendation service. Because until now, we have something more like a Spotify. you can create your profile, indicate which goals you are interested in particular, and then get recommendations. We are moving a step ahead by trying to provide a service where the users of the platform, and the idea was really to reach millions. So typically, for example, young people, be it from universities or vocational professional education training entities, would be some of those we would like to reach. So first we would offer them to choose what kind of mental model they are most associated with. For example, here we define several mental models which are not associated with industries, but rather with the type of, for example, the type of work you would like to do or you are currently doing. And you can also be simply a citizen, for example. So you can choose a couple of those models. Then also choose your preferred goals. And then after that, you would be provided an opportunity to take assessment tests. So we will be providing assessment tests which are objective. That is, for example, multiple choice questions, etc. You know, when we try to objectively assess the competencies of the person, identify potential gaps, and then recommend what kind of learning would be most suitable for him or her, and help build a customized learning pathway. For example, here you can see what we actually use. We have specialized competencies, that is competencies by goal, fully based on the UNESCO SDG competencies guide. You can see here, for example, goal 1, it has cognitive, social, emotional, and then behavioral types of objectives. And I will show one example. But also there are what we call cross-cutting competencies that are very important for the SDGs, normative, collaboration, integrated problem solving, critical thinking, etc. And so you can get tested in what we are developing right now on this. Here is just an example of a specialized goal with learning objectives that you can find in the SDG UNESCO guide, and we work together with UNESCO on that concept. And I picked a goal, which you can see afterwards in the presentation, actually, that Madina used as an example here. And then what we are also doing is that in the end of the process, what we, as I mentioned, it's basically a picture here of what we are trying to offer, is to enable a learner to choose what his or her objectives are, assess his or her SDG knowledge and competencies, and then get a recommendation on a learning pathway. So that's one thing. So it's just an example of how the assessment report would look like, for example, for cross-cutting competencies compared to an average learner taking the same assessment. Then we also have some free e-learning which is available. For example, we have the introductory course to the 2030 agenda that covers in more detail various things, including goals in more detail, explaining for each goal why there are targets like that in each goal. And the last thing that we wanted to mention in terms of projects that we do that might be interesting for your constituencies, for your students, is that we also have some collaborative projects where we engage citizens. So Crowd for SDG is a project where we actually invite youth to participate in the innovation competitions, work on teams, multidisciplinary teams, to come up with solutions to some of the SDG challenges. So just because we really don't have time, I'm not going to go into detail, but I just wanted to announce that so that you could see. We are starting the second year. The two topics that would be particularly important are climate change and gender equality. And we will be opening actually a competition for innovation teams. And quite often we also have multicultural, multi-site teams. It's an online collaboration right now. So sometimes we may have students from Mexico, Nigeria, Europe working together on a team. And that's it. I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Alina. I could listen for hours. I'm learning so much, and I know colleagues of mine and others are already asking questions about where they can get your presentations and how can they learn more. So thank you. I know they will look forward to meeting you in the chat, in the breakout rooms, where they will ask more questions. And but I've been delighted. I'm delighted to let everybody know that we have some special guests, unexpected guests who have joined us from the European Commission. And I've asked them privately in the chat if they would be willing to say a few words. To reflect a little bit on the role of TVET, so Technical Vocational Education and Training Sector, and what you have talked about with respect to the European Union and how that looks. And so I'm really pleased to invite Joao Santos, if he wouldn't mind just saying just a few words, a minute or two, with respect to what he's heard today and where the European Union is going with these things.
Thanks, Judy. I hope you managed to see me and hear me well, and congratulations to you and to all the participants for setting up this group, which is extremely important for us at the European Union. Just to tell you, because I don't want to spend too much of your time on this, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals are really guiding principles for us, not only in terms of you know, what we do in development aid, but also in the way we structure our policies internally. I can tell you that last year we had two kind of defining moments during the year in which we set the policy framework for the 27 EU member states, together with them, obviously. And if you look at these documents, they all have extensive references to VET, so TVET, contributing to provide people with the skills that will allow them to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, but not only in terms of delivering skills, but also incorporating Sustainable Development Goal practices within the TVET system itself. And therefore, you know, what you are doing is extremely relevant for us. And we are doing not only policy, but also in terms of funding. We have a program, well, Erasmus Plus, European Social Fund, and in all of these programs, we are making sure that the Sustainable Development Goals are incorporated as criteria for us to judge whether the projects are really doing what we want or not. So although we have, for example, on Friday, we'll have a big meeting, an online information session on the Centers of Vocational Excellence, which are aimed to bring partners from all over the world, not only in Europe, to work on vocational excellence. Even there, we incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals as one of the criteria. So to the extent that projects take into account the Sustainable Development Goals, that they will get more points for that fact. So we are trying to not only set up the policy context for incorporating and making sure that that contributes to Sustainable Development Goals, but also in terms of our funding processes, we are taking them into account as much as we can. I'm sure there's a lot of things we can improve in that respect, and that's why both I have a colleague of mine, Tim, he's also participating in the meeting today. We are here basically to learn from you, but also contribute with what we can, but learn to make sure that the way we define policies in TVET, as well as in the way we define the supporting financing programs with the grants we give for the development of TVET, that we incorporate these Sustainable Development Goals in the way we think and the practices we do. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I don't want to interrupt you more, but just to tell you that we are here to contribute, but also to learn a lot from you, because I'm sure there's excellent practices all over the world, outside Europe mainly, that we'd like to make sure that we incorporate in our practices. Thank you very much, Judy.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing a few words at such short notice. We're delighted you're here, and we look forward to conversations in the breakout groups with you and your colleagues. And I see we have Simon Yalams here from UNESCO Univoc TVET from the Caribbean and now in Nigeria. Wonderful to have you here, Simon. We're so delighted. There's so many great people. So luckily, we'll have a chance to chat with everybody in the breakout session. We do want to make sure we have a good 20-minute conversation. So we will break you out into 3 groups. and you'll have a chance to meet and talk with a variety of the participants, including those we've just heard from. And then we'll bring you all back into the main room. They remind you that we are doing 1 hour and 15 minutes. So we will return to the main room and have some closing remarks from Medina and Elena based on what they've heard and some of the questions that you asked them. I also invite you to use the Jamboard. You can see the link again in the chat. Please click on that link and you'll see that there's already a few things on the Jamboard. We invite you to put your thoughts in the Jamboard, or if you want to connect with people, go ahead and put your name and your contact information. If you say, hey, I'd like to talk to some of you offline in another setting, please feel free to put your contact information there, or answers to the questions or further questions. You'll have 1 or 2 facilitators joining you from our leadership group here at the Affinity Group to help with the conversation. So my colleague Andrea will break us into the 3 groups. So we'll see you all there, and you'll have a chance to chat more with Medina, Elena, Simon, Joao, and his colleagues. Welcome back, and so sorry. I know that someone was speaking in your groups when we were brought back. So we have just a few more minutes, and I would love to invite Elena and Medina to share a few observations about what you heard, and perhaps talk about the opportunity to be involved in your piloting with the students. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Judy. Yeah. I think sort of it seemed like for the breakout groups, we didn't have a lot of time really to discuss that more in depth, and I think there were a lot of participants who wanted to share more. But one thing I think that comes across really clearly is that, of course, we sort of all have 2 roles when it comes to contributing to the SDGs. First, as citizens, and I think that was the comment about primary school, even kindergarten, etc. So how in our daily lives, as consumers, voters, and things that we do, we can contribute to the SDGs individually, but also professionally. All of our jobs, in one way or another, relate to the SDGs. And through our professions, we have a way also of contributing to the SDGs. Of course, some will have managerial roles and will be taking decisions. In the public sector, it will be design of public policies. But then also through the technical and professional education and training, there is also an opportunity for the educators, of course, to engage with the students. But then also the students are future professionals who will be contributing to the SDGs. And I think one of the things that we sort of tried really to emphasize, and that was the second question in the discussion, is how do we make sure, I mean, of course, we can take the SDGs and read all the targets and indicators literally. That would be helpful, but it's not sufficient in itself, because the SDGs were developed as they were basically negotiated as a global framework. It's not a scientific model. It's the result of the negotiations of many UN member states, building on feedback from civil society, private sector, who came up with those goals. And then nationally, governments tailor them, but also each stakeholder, for example, the private sector, etc., they also need to look at the SDGs and see what are the targets that are relevant for us. Maybe there are certain things are not mentioned explicitly because the agenda had to be manageable. But for that sector, it would be extremely important. And I think what might be interesting also, there is a so-called global reporting initiative that was developed specifically for the private sector. For example, they designed the indicators for industries. So for example, if you are in the construction industry, there will be SDG indicators that are not in the global set, but these are the indicators that are specific for the industry. And I think that might be another layer which might be taken into account when, for example, you try to work on buildings, etc. That's another source of information which is more scientific also, that can also help you complement your activities and see where you need to intervene and change things.
Thanks, Elena. That's wonderful. Did you want to mention a little bit about being involved in the How could an institution's students be involved in your mental model development?
Yes, so that's something I just don't want to take a lot of time from you, but we mentioned this, we showed this UN SDG Learning Gateway, and we also showed mental models and tests. We are currently implementing a web solution, and we will be testing it. So if there are students who are interested in participating in those pilots, we would be really happy to have them on board. So if there is an interest from you, please don't hesitate to contact us. In the PowerPoint, there is the team's email address, but I can also put this in the chat.
Excellent, Elena. And I see a question from Jenny. Is there a central place where curriculum ideas for TVET, post-secondary programs and courses are shared, such as assignments, assessments, student co-creation of knowledge? So I guess, is there a repository somewhere, I guess globally, for this kind of curriculum information that Elena or anybody else is aware of?
Yeah, I'm not aware of something like that, but I think there is a need for, we are developing some examples. They are quite generic, it's for citizens in general, but I think it might be also interesting to have something like that.
It would be interesting, and perhaps it's something with Ken and UNESCO Univoc we could talk about. There is the TVET forum where you can share a lot of really interesting information. I really encourage you to join that TVET forum so that you could be in touch with your colleagues. And so as we're wrapping up today, and perhaps we could put the link in the chat to the TVET forum so that people could find it easily. And also perhaps just to share about Canada, our open educational toolkit on the SDGs, which is a Canadian attempt to collect some best practices around the SDGs that we're happy to share with you, and we will be adding more examples to that, including international examples. If any of you from any of your colleges would like to share a link, please, the chat box is for all of us. We're happy to have you promote or let people know about what you are offering. And we welcome you to join us for future meetings. I think this one was just as fascinating and useful as the first two were. I know a few of you I see have been with us now for 3 meetings. Many of you are new today, but we will have another meeting, which will be on, Andrea, can you remind me? May
25th, Tuesday, May 25th.
Tuesday, May the 25th. We don't know the topic yet, and we don't know the time. We choose the time based on the speakers. So depending on who we will invite to speak, the time will vary across the world. And maybe soon we'll have a time that is more suitable to our friends in Australia, who often end up being in the middle of the night. So the next topic we will be deciding shortly. We welcome your suggestions of topics as well. You saw in the Jamboard, which you can keep writing in as we speak. You can, if you have a topic request, I think question number 4, or Jamboard number 4 was, what would you like to talk about? Please put some ideas in there. We can use that to guide our discussions. We will meet again next month and every month. And we welcome you to stay in touch with each other through the TVET forum, but also the emails. People have shared email addresses. So I know everybody would welcome to be in touch with each other. And we look forward to seeing you all in a month from now on May the 25th. You will all automatically receive an invitation to the next meeting. And we really appreciate the time you spent with us today. I know we learned a lot, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Elena and Medina, for your wonderful work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.